are listening to The Story Points, a podcast where the worlds of product and engineering converge to delve into topics that resonate with us in our daily professional lives.
Hello everyone, myself, Niraj and PK are back today with another episode of The Story Points. We took a break in between due to some different priorities, and it was also a festive season here in India. Anyway, what's important is we are here now with another discussion. In this episode, we will share some thoughts on story points, why estimations are necessary, and some common misconceptions about story points. Example, does one story point mean one day of work? So I'll have a question now to PK on what is a story point or a story according to you?
Hi Niraj, hello everyone. So we use stories or user stories in our day-to-day working of an agile software team. It's literally a story that we build in our heads about what a user wants out of the system. So when I say a story, I literally mean a story. And this helps everyone sort of understand what needs to be done. So I'll take a step back and set a bit of a context here. User story is a concept that was introduced by Patton, who is credited with inventing the user story mapping technique. And he's written a fantastic book called User Story Mapping. I highly recommend it to all folks who are just sort of stepping into the world of agility and software and product development. So anyway, with that said, essentially what he establishes is, for a product to be built, there are various people who come together and do certain things. For example, a developer writes code, a designer sort of designs the product, and there is usually another person who makes sure whatever is done is working as expected, which is the testing.
And we also have QAs to test the end product and whatnot. So it's a formation of a complete team.
Exactly. So you have the testers, you have the designers and the developers, and there is a product person who kind of tells or orchestrates this entire thing. So these three disciplines, primarily the development, the testing and the design, are referred to as the three amigos in the book.
Wow.
And the reason why this is important is because let's keep the three amigos aside for now, but let's just take the example of you and me, right? If I say, hey Niraj, let's go eat a burger, there are multiple possibilities. And usually when I say we'll go eat a burger, you'll probably be expecting a Zinger burger, and I'll probably be expecting a McDonald's McVeggie.
Not a good
whatever,
choice though. But
right? Anyway, but the point is, in our heads, we've already visualized something. And depending on that visualization, we've started to form different thought processes based on that. So similarly, even in the software development world, when I say I want this feature, now that feature may mean different things to different people. As a developer, you're thinking, oh, I'm going to do this feature in this way. This is what the feature is supposed to do. As a designer, they are thinking, okay, this is what I need to design. This is how it should be, so on and so forth. So a user story is a story that we all talk about and build a common narrative about. This, when discussed, helps all of us align on what burger we are talking about or what feature we are talking about and what needs to be done. So that is the funda of a user story. And literally, like I said, you need to, it's a story about what the user wants, about the system and how it should behave and so on and so forth. Do you want to add something to this? Is this making sense?
yeah, actually, whatever you mentioned, right, it makes really sense because that's how my entire life has always been, right? When I started my development and how the story lands in my particular Jira board or Trello, whatever we use the software, right? But there's also another layer on top of this, like in any case when we brainstorm a feature along with the entire team. I mean, it's not always that the immediate next step is a user story. Developers might request for a POC or a spike, and in my opinion, I always call it as a dev story, and and that's also important for developers to understand exactly what needs to be done. So for an example, there is a feature where we have to interact with unknown systems, and for that to deliver, the developers need to understand what kind of APIs or SDKs or packages they are going to deal with. And this is where a dev story comes into picture, which is a kind of a small part of the feature to understand how to kind of unblock technical uncertainties.
Yeah, so yeah, that makes complete sense, Neeraj. I think from a product or a delivery standpoint, POCs are important because it helps us de-risk delivery, right? And by understanding what these POCs are or unknowns are or what you call as dev stories, uh, we are able to communicate that to the larger audience, and hopefully get them to appreciate the nuances of software development or product development. And by doing that, it acts as a great lever to build trust with the teams that we're working with. And by teams, I mean the business, it could be the marketing folks, anybody. So uh, that's a great perspective on, or that's a good introduction to what a POC or a spike is. The other reason why the dev stories are important is that for product, oftentimes, for a business analyst who's working in the team, it helps us slice the stories better. So I'll give you an example. Let's talk about a user information capturing system. And typically you will see this everywhere. You would have sold a service. You expect the guest or the customer to give you some information about themselves so that you are prepared to offer that service or provide them that service in a very optimal sort of way. So, and obviously this has a front end. There's a form. You ask certain things to the guest. You take that, and there'll be various people who are consuming this information. So you probably have a database to store the information that your customer has given you, and this needs to be kind of passed into different other platforms or whatever systems for the other teams to consume it. Right now, as a product, I will come and say, let's execute this entire feature in two parts. One part where there's a form, user enters the form, submits it, and the DB captures it. And the second part where once the DB is captured, it we kind of relay it further into other systems and cut the data into whatever is important for the relevant team and give it. Now, when I come to you as a developer with this sort of idea, you might say, hey, wait a second, what other systems are we dealing with downstream or the other teams that are using? And you might say, okay, I don't know what that other system does, so I need some time to understand that. And that is a great candidate for a spike or a POC to understand, okay, how does this work, right? Now that you've told me that this is a unknown, I will then say, okay, let's break the second part, which is taking that information from the DB and pushing it into other downstream systems into now two parts. Yeah. So there is a POC or a dev story, and then there is a part where you actually build the functionality. So you see, because you've told me what the unknowns are, I can now, one, appreciate the uncertainty you're dealing with. I can also create that narrative to the people around and build transparency to say this is actually what's happening. So I think, I think that's the importance of talking about the user stories and the POCs and the dev stories. So anyway, we've understood what user stories are, dev stories are, why they're useful, but we've come to a point where the product knows what needs to be done. Now the next question is, when can this be achieved? So in order to answer this, developers use estimations to help everyone get a sense of timelines, right? Or to help answer these questions. Let me rephrase that. Developers use estimations to help everyone get a sense of what's coming, right? So Neeraj, can you talk about estimations?
Sure, PK. So it's a very interesting topic because generally I've seen two types of estimations. Like one is called relative and another one is called absolute. Let me talk about the absolute first. Absolute estimations are based on fixed time unit, like one story point equal to 1 day or couple of hours, depends on the team how they want to come to that end. And there's also other estimation technique which is called relative. This is completely based upon the complexity of the user story in relation to a baseline story. This might sound a little complicated, but let me help you understand in a much better way. To keep this short, my opinion is that never do absolute estimations, because it's not about how many lines of code a developer will add. It's always about the complexity of the feature. For an example, I can have a task that involves me writing 200 lines of code, and that, let's say, it takes me 4 hours. But I can also have another task that, to begin with, I need to solve some algorithm or understand the SDK, and end up having just 10 lines of code, and that also took me 4 hours. Now, because there is an unknown factor over here, complexity, that's why you never choose a absolute estimation technique. This also helps to team, because a team has a composition of different level of engineers, right? There's junior, there is a senior developer, and the speed also matters. The moment you have something like absolute level thing, the speed plays a really important role, because a senior engineer will definitely write code much faster than a junior engineer, and that's not a healthy practice to go with. So that's why having a relative estimation technique will always help, because now you are estimating based on the complexity and not based on someone's skill to how fast the code can be written. And this also gives a proper information to the product and the business people, that you have a particular developer who can write code 10x faster, but that's not a good practice. So it's always good to have a relative technique. There's also one more thing, that the dev story, what I earlier spoke about, the POC or a spike, will never have a estimation. That's also because the complexity here is unknown. For an example, I have a dev story to find out the API or the SDK for a particular third-party system. Now, how well it's documented, do I have access to the documentation, do I have access to the packages, all of these things are unknown, and no one can actually give an estimation. But one good thing about these dev stories are they are focused at a one particular thing. For example, you should never have a dev story which basically has 4 or 5 technical unknowns. It's always better to have one technical unknown as a one dev story, so that also parallelization among the team can happen.
I think that's a great point, Niraj. I think there are a couple of perspectives I want to add to this. One is that it's also a great idea to time box these POCs or dev stories, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't want to end up going into rabbit holes, because there's a lot of unknowns.
Yes.
So it's a great point that you mentioned, that we need to take just one thing, focus on that, time box it, and wrap it up. You might end up doing something for about 6 hours and say, I still haven't found an answer, and that's okay.
There's also one more thing which I want to add. I have seen this in my past experience, that a dev story can also end up having another dev story creation.
Yeah.
So that's also a factor to be taken care.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. The other thing I wanted to add is, generally, I think estimations that happen in product teams should be taken with a pinch of salt. And the reason I say that is because as humans, we are not good at estimations. And I'll give you an example. If I were to say that, Niraj, you stay in, let's say, Mysore, and you're now working in Bangalore and you're driving back to Mysore. If I ask you, Niraj, how long will you take to drive from Bangalore to Mysore? You will probably have a reasonably accurate answer. You would probably say, I'll take about 2.5 hours. You'd probably end up taking 2 hours 45 minutes or 2 hours 30 minutes or whatever it is. But it's still sort of acceptable in the general sense. But if I ask you, Niraj, can you tell me at what point of time in your journey will you be at the Ramnagar junction where the petrol pump is? You'll probably have an answer, but that's going to be way off what it's going to be in reality.
Yeah.
And it's not because it's you. It's because we as humans, I mean, even I would probably be way off. It's just that we humans are not good at it. It's just not. We're not good at it. That's the bottom line.
And that's why humans created things called as Google Maps.
Yeah, exactly. And even Google Maps is not accurate, right? How often do we end up going to a place thinking it'll take only 15 minutes, but it actually took us half an hour.
Yeah.
So that's one. And the other thing about complexity, I think there was a one of the first uh, agile coaches that I worked with kind of seeded this thought into my head, which is about when you're talking about a team and when you're estimating a story, there are 3 C's that you need to be aware of. And what are those 3 C's? The complexity, the context, and the competency. So the idea is to always remove the competency and context out of the picture and estimate the complexity in itself. And to appreciate this better, let me delve into what these mean. So let us say the two of us are a part of a team and we are estimating a story. Now you have what? Let's say you have 10 years of software programming experience. I probably come with much, much, much lesser than that experience in terms of the software programming part. So if you say I can do something in 1 hour, for sure I may not be able to do it in the same 1 hour. I might probably take 2 hours.
Yep.
Similarly, now let's take the same two people in a team where I have been you might have 10 years of experience, but I have been working for 3 years in a particular context of a product or a particular code base. So I know the ins and outs of the code base, right? And here the context makes a difference because of the context that I have, I might say that this will take only 5 minutes, whereas you, despite of having 10 years of programming experience, you may not be able to figure out why something is not happening in 10 minutes. So that is the context piece of it. But if you remove that, if you negate those two, because those are relative, you just have the complexity that's involved in the task itself. I think we should strive to isolate that part and then sort of come to an estimation sort of answer or an estimate. So to do that, I think there are various techniques. For example, there is a poker planning. And the idea is when we do this, everyone gets a sense of what the complexity is, and everyone negates what the competency and the context part of it is, and then arrive or agree on a particular estimate for a story. So I think this is sort of has got us to almost the closing segment of this discussion, right? Where we talk about what we're trying to do or what we've spoken about so far. So and before I actually start off with my closing sort of couple of sentences, I would want to give another example to emphasize on the importance of relative estimation. And again, why relative estimation is important compared to the absolute estimation, right? Absolute estimation ends up being influenced by competency, context, and complexity. Whereas as humans, and we are not good at estimation, right? But let me now take the other example of if I show you 2 jackfruits, and if I tell you, now compare the 2 jackfruits and tell me how big is the second one compared to the first one, you will be able to approximately tell at a very reasonable accuracy, this looks like it's 2 times the size of the first jackfruit. Or if I show you a German Shepherd and the German Shepherd dog breed and a Dalmatian dog breed, you will probably see, they're probably the same dimension approximately.
Yeah.
So that is what we're trying to establish in relative sizing.
And also one more thing, right? In absolute, I have seen a team getting built with a really bad health because a lot of favorism starts because in absolute estimations, people start favoring, oh, he's a senior one. He writes code faster. Let me give the story to that person. Oh, no, don't give it to that person because he's just started new. So this brings a very unhealthy culture among the team, and that's not good for the end product. And also creates a lot of bottlenecks that, oh, this was created by him. Let him do that. I cannot do it. I'll not touch the code. So it's always a bad practice to follow these things as well. And this comes out very naturally the moment you go with the absolute estimation way.
Yeah, I think it's also important we talk about different relative estimation techniques, right?
Yeah.
Absolute estimations is pretty simple. You associate it with a time, or you associate it with some sort of a monetary sort of value, because you can say, okay, this feature is worth, I'm going to do this for $50, or I'm going to do this feature for $100 or whatever. Or you can also say, I'll do this in 5 days or 10 days or whatever it is. Now, a relative estimation, on the other hand, you have multiple techniques of doing it. So one is the first way that we usually and all the ways involve a baseline.
Yeah.
So we first establish, okay, what is the baseline? And then we say, relative to this baseline, how much more complex is this feature that we want to build?
Yeah, you basically have that comparison factor.
Exactly. So there are two popular ways that people do relative estimation, right? One is the planning poker, and the other is the t-shirt sizing.
Yeah.
So again, planning poker and t-shirt sizing are quite
Similar in a way.
but also quite detailed if you want to go into the nuances of it.
Yeah.
But essentially, I will let you talk about the t-shirt sizing in a bit, but let me talk about poker planning for now. Poker planning basically involves a set of poker cards that every one of your developers have. And once you've established the baseline, you will then present a story that you want the team to build. And typically it's done by the entire team, right? Not just the
Yeah.
people who will work on the story. And the reason for that is you want to eliminate the competency and the context part of it. You only want to get the complexity. We want to eliminate the competency and the context, and you only want to discover the complexity of it. So therefore you get everyone, all the developers in, and you say, okay, this is the story. Now compare it with your baseline story, and you first determine what is the estimate for this.
Yeah.
And this can be on the lines of what you call as the Fibonacci series. So it's a 1, 3,
5.
1, 2, 3,
5.
5, 7, so on and so forth.
Not good.
So the reason why we follow that and not a pattern of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or whatever is because there's very little difference between a 3 and a 4, 2 and a 3, 1 and a 1.5.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. So everyone says, this is the number that I think.
Just want to add, like, I guess coming from my past experience, right? Generally, the t-shirt sizing and poker planning goes very hand in hand, because the moment you have the poker planning, the entire process is more like, you have a person who basically opens a couple of features and ask everyone to just t-shirt sizes. Now t-shirt sizes are like, S, M, like medium, small, large, XL, double XL, and based on everyone's thinking, like how much this should be sized, they give up a number and finally reveal their cards or whatever tool they are using, and they take out a kind of an average. So in most of the times you'd never end up having like, someone estimating small and someone estimating 2XL, because everyone has a similar understanding about the product as well. So you have a little bit of context over here. So generally you end up having something like, medium, large, and you repeat this until you come up with a particular story where you say, okay, these kind of stories are medium. And let's give a number like, medium stories are, let's say 2 or 3 point. And then now you have a numbering in place. So in the moment other stories open up, now you have that comparison, what you were earlier talking about, that, okay, this story is less complex compared to the baseline story because the medium story is now the baseline story.
Right. And it's also important, it's a good practice for teams to keep revisiting their baseline stories because the baselines keep changing.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, I think it's also for the benefit of the audience, we should definitely put in a link to poker planning and t-shirt size estimations, and we will do that. But so this is the poker planning and the t-shirt sizing techniques. I think it's also important to talk about how not to use estimations.
Okay.
Right? Because taking inspiration from our last episode, I oftentimes hear people say that, okay, this team, we need to track velocity for.
Oh yeah.
And we will use the velocity to predict when a feature will go live. And I'm like, no, that's not what we want to use estimations for. As a practice, it's not a great thing to do.
PK, but it depends a lot on what context you're using this. Sometimes
Exactly.
it helps you to do much better things with these reports, not in a negative way, but let's say that these reports helps you to understand at a management sitting at a very higher level. They don't have the visibility what's happening at the ground level. So these reports do help them to understand that for example, the management might ask that why it's taking so much of time, and these reports might help up to understand. But
Again,
yeah, it has different use
I agree
cases,
with you
depends on the
partially.
organization as well.
Yeah, I agree with you partially because, one of my previous bosses used to say context is king, right? And so do so many others. But going by the report itself will not tell you the whole story. You'll have to
Yeah.
understand a little bit more context. I feel like velocity, with all the good intent, was introduced, but then it's evolved into different sort of ways. One of the things that I don't recommend teams to do is the first thing is use velocity as a way of predicting your own progress. To say that, okay, last 3 weeks we've had a velocity of whatever 15 story points. Therefore, in the next sprint we will do 15 story points. I think that's um, a recipe for disaster, because you don't know what kind of complexity arises, although the story points are kind of similar. The other thing is, I don't recommend teams to compare their velocities and say,
Yeah.
oh, this team achieved 20 story points, we have to also achieve 20 story points.
True.
That is also a recipe for disaster. So I think these are like immediate red flags or anti-patterns to me. We shouldn't be doing that. Instead, we can use story points to understand approximately what can we expect out of the sprint. So I think this brings us to the closing segment that I had in mind, right? So estimations are not cut in stone. It's not a commitment that the developer is giving you in writing, to which you can go back to the person after whatever sprint and say, why did you not do this? It is an estimate. It's a very subjective or a relative science. It tells you or gives you a sense of what's coming and what are we trying to deal with. It is not for somebody else to say, okay, now that you've told me this is X story points, I will hold you against it, or I will hold you to it if you don't do it. So I think that's my closing sort of points on this topic. Neeraj, what about you? Do you want to add?
Yeah, it was a very interesting discussion what we had so far, because estimations in a lot of companies I've seen is not taken in a right way, and developers are always accounted that you told me this will be done in 3 days and it's a 4 day, it's not done yet. That's not why you do the estimations. Yeah, it does help for that, getting the timelines, but the timelines are not, like as you said, it's not the cutting stone. But also one more thing, like for every team I would suggest that it's important that how to identify a complexity, and that's where what you mentioned earlier about the poker planning and t-shirt sizing plays a really important role. Maybe in one of the future episodes we will try to cover this as well, but for today I feel we have spoken good things about the story points and how the estimation should be done. And thank you everyone, I hope this was really insightful, and please do leave feedback if you have any.
Thank you.